Is Borderlands 3 best on the Nintendo Switch, or should you bet on another console like PlayStation or Xbox, or maybe even another handheld like Steam Deck? Borderlands 3 was initially released back on September 13th, 2019 for PS4, Xbox One, and PC, and a month later, even got a Mac port. Who is playing this on Mac? This is why I have no friends. And then a year later, it got a release on Stadia, and we all know how that went. 4 years later, it finally got the long-awaited Switch port. It seriously took them 4 years to make this port. Since this game's launch, there's been talk about how this game would never get a Switch port due to how vast and graphically advanced this game is. Though in the past, there have been speculations about this game getting a Switch release, mainly because the European rating board PEGI had alluded to the Switch version's existence 2 separate times, both in 2021 and 2022. After reaching out to a 2K representative, it was later confirmed this version was a mistake. It wouldn't actually be released. It wasn't until a month before the game's release that 2K even announced this game was coming to the Nintendo Switch. And that's all, they quietly announced this. And since then, they've barely talked about it. What are they trying to hide? Why aren't they revving up the hype train for the Nintendo Switch version? It wasn't until one day before release they finally showed up and gave us the first gameplay trailer with minimal gameplay. So most day one consumers are kind of rolling the dice with the Switch version. But it's out now, and I'm here to help answer the question, is it best on Nintendo Switch? Borderlands 3 is a first-person shoot and loot kind of game, a shooter-looter if you will. If you played one of the previous Borderlands games, you know what to expect, and if you had fun with those, you will most likely enjoy this one as well. You can choose between 4 Vault Hunters and fight enemies, defeat bosses, collect weapons, and upgrade your character. Since the game launched, several pieces of DLC were released, but you don't need to worry about trying to collect it, as the Switch version already has all of it included. You're forced to get the Ultimate version on the Switch, which includes the base game and all the content add-ons and bonus cosmetics. This review will mainly be about the performance and overall quality on the Switch. I don't think I need to talk too much about the gameplay loops, as I'm sure you probably already know if you want this game or not. It's been out for 4 years. The Borderlands franchise on Nintendo Switch has had a bit of an odd track record when it comes to graphics on each title. The first 2 Borderlands games had a distinct lack of blur, bloom, and anti-aliasing compared to the other console and PC versions. But Borderlands, the pre-sequel on Nintendo Switch, actually did a fantastic job bringing all those more graphically intensive features to the Switch. The pre-sequel actually both looked and ran better on the Switch than any other Borderlands game. The first 2 Borderlands games were running at a native 1080p dock and 720p handheld, while the pre-sequel was running at a dynamic resolution, dipping when things got a little more intense and very rarely missing the 30 frames per second cap. And looking at Borderlands 3, this game is running at a surprising 60 frames per second. Well, at least it tries to. This game runs anywhere from 25 to 60 frames per second, but most of the time it generally sticks around the 45 frames per second mark, which is incredibly impressive and unexpected. You might prefer a lockdown frame rate, even if it's only at 30, but I'm happy to take it as high as it goes. And when things get more intense, you see the frame rate chug a bit. Though it doesn't happen often, and it's not unplayable by any means. Obviously, for the best experience with a fast-paced first-person shooter like this, you'll want a more silky, smooth frame rate with at least 60 frames per second. The PS5 and Steam Deck versions hit that with ease. The Steam Deck hits 60 frames per second at a native 800p resolution, and the PS5 hits 60 frames per second at 4K, and can even go 120 frames per second at 1080p. So if your display supports 120 frames per second, you may prefer a current-gen console version. Although the frame rate on Switch is 25 to 45 frames per second, your eyes get adjusted to it fairly quickly. Well, my eyes did at least. There's no denying this game would be a lot nicer at 60 frames per second. Borderlands 3 on Switch also uses dynamic resolution, which varies depending on how intense the action in the game is getting, which is also why sometimes the resolution may look better in some places than others. And the low resolution doesn't help with the almost non-existent textures. Usually I'll blame a lot of the bad textures on Switch games due to the lower resolution, but here it's obvious most of the textures are completely gone, or at least just extremely compressed and blurry. Just look at the ground or even the gun. The textures give most assets a flat and pixelated look. The textures on Steam Deck and PS5 look very similar to each other, with the biggest difference being the overall resolution. You'll really notice this texture downgrade when you look at things like the sign. I can read it, but it's not that clear on the Switch. There's also a huge lack of in-game assets like foliage. Most of the grass and plants are just missing. Even this poster on the wall is just gone. Some things just look completely different, like these doors. The lighting quality is also heavily reduced, with most shadows being extremely pixelated or just completely missing. Running it on the Steam Deck also has a very oddly pixelated shadows, but not nearly as pixelated or light as the Switch. Now, the PS5 version obviously looks the best here, with the shadows being dark without any pixelation on all assets. I also really like how the PlayStation and Steam Deck versions have light bouncing off other objects like the wall. You can clearly see this with the fire. This is also present on the Switch version, but it doesn't blend with the environment as well. This effect looks particularly cool when you're firing the gun from your vehicle and the bullets are casting light onto the ground below. And and we can barely see it here with the Switch version. There are some elements that clearly light up the environment, like the flashlights on the front of some of these enemies, and these fire barrels, but it's not the same. There's also a distinct lack of particles on the Switch version. You can also see the depth of field effect has mostly gone from the Switch version as well. And quickly looking at this water, you can tell the Switch doesn't have great reflections. It seems very flat and boring. Another thing I've noticed is the lower draw distance. You can even see the assets and shadows pop in a lot closer than other versions. One thing I like about Borderlands is the ragdoll physics enemies have after I obliterate them with my weapons. And for the most part, those silly death animations are there, but sometimes you just see the character disappear. Overall, obviously the graphics and performance on the Switch aren't the best, but we have to remember, the Switch is on its 7th year, and for a handheld console that's this old, I have to give it some credit, because it still looks a lot better than a lot of other games we see. There was a lot of work done so this could even be ported onto the Switch, and if you don't have another console or PC that's available, and you have to play it on the Switch, it absolutely does the trick. I'm surprised how good this game runs with being such a graphically intensive game. Playing handheld mode is similar to dock mode, except the resolution is decreased even further. It can get really blurry, but again, not unplayable. And unless you have a Steam Deck or any other handheld PC gaming device, this is the only way to play handheld natively on a console. Playing with the Joy-Cons is as you expect for a first-person shooter like this. The small analog sticks don't make it incredibly comfortable. I definitely recommend having a grip or a Pro controller for those long handheld gaming sessions. One amazing feature that is absent from the console versions is the use of gyro controls, which is great on Switch, and was something I felt I was missing when I was playing the PS5 version, and obviously goes without saying if you have a Nintendo Switch OLED, and then the colors look amazing. If you've ever played a Borderlands game, you'll know a huge part of the fun is playing multiplayer, whether that's with a friend locally or online. Well, unfortunately, unlike the past installments on Switch, this game doesn't support local split-screen co-op. You'll have to play with a friend online or local wireless. This makes sense though, because I'm sure the Switch is using all of its power just to run the game single player. So if you want to play this game with someone on Switch, you have to have another copy of the game and another Switch. This is a huge downgrade for the Switch version, as a big reason I would usually recommend any Switch game is the extreme convenience of playing games with your friends using local split screen, because you can bring your system to a friend's house and dock it, and the controllers are way more simplistic, especially with the Joy-Cons. So it's kind of unfortunate to see this here. It doesn't ruin the core of the game, but it would be a big reason for roommates or siblings to get this version. But circling back to the local wireless feature, this is unique to the Switch version, because you can play this game with another Switch user without needing an internet connection. So you can play on a bus or a train or school without needing access to mobile data or any sort of connection. So if you and a friend happen to get this game, then it's perfect. Borderlands 3 supports 4-player local split screen on other console versions, so if you have even more people you want to play with, the current gen consoles would be the best version for you. As for the Steam Deck, you technically can play local split screen, but just like the Switch Lite, it's not really meant to be played docked. The Steam Deck can be played docked, but it's not the most convenient, especially because you need a dock and you need to individually pair each controller. One thing that is incredibly unfortunate is the lack of cross-platform play. Unlike the PlayStation, PC, and Xbox versions, you can't play this game with people on other platforms. It mainly sucks because I don't think any of my friends will get the Switch version because of the hefty price tag, which brings me to the price. One of the biggest issues for the Switch version at the time of recording this is the infamous Switch tax, and the overall fact it's a new version just released. This is releasing at an astounding $80 Canadian, which is full price. This was the same price the game had at launch on all versions 4 years ago, which feels incredibly odd, especially because I can get the exact deluxe version of this game with all the same DLC on PS5 for $36 Canadian, which is less than half the price. Heck, roughly 2 years ago I got the super deluxe version at GameStop for less than $20 on PS4. And even on Steam, the exact same Ultimate Edition is $48 Canadian. I don't know why, but this game's price on all platforms except for the Switch has gone down significantly, and I see every version of Borderlands go on sale constantly for dirt cheap prices. So instead of being like me and buying this game day one on Nintendo Switch, like I did for this video, so please subscribe, wait a few months or maybe even weeks until this goes on sale. Black Friday and holiday deals are just around the corner. The full price Borderlands Legendary Collection on Switch was just $12 Canadian a few days ago. So please, unless you're absolutely dying to play this game on Switch day one, wait for a sale. And for physical collectors, the game will be on sale too, so don't worry. It probably won't be disappearing off shelves anytime soon. I bought my copy of the Legendary Collection for a similar low price. It's often the cheapest new game at GameStop. Now, speaking of the physical version, if you are picking this game up physically, this version does something a little differently to past Borderlands games. This actually has a cartridge, so that's definitely a surprise. I kind of wish the box art was the vibrant color like the other versions of the game, but this gray version of the case is fine. I also wanted to quickly mention the install size of Borderlands on Switch, because it's kind of confusing. The digital download is 8.5 gigs. Even with the DLC included, this takes roughly 18 to 19 gigs. This is a lot less than I had initially thought, because the box says you need 62 gigabytes of micro SD card storage. Why though? This is similar to the amount of storage it takes on PC and consoles. And this also means you are required to have a micro SD card in your Switch. Well, is Borderlands 3 best on Nintendo Switch? Well, it depends. If you need to play this game handheld and you don't have the Steam Deck, yeah, this would be best on Switch. And if you don't have any other consoles and this is the only version you can possibly get, then yeah, it's your only choice, so get it. But if you have any other consoles and you want to save some money, and you don't mind playing it on the TV, then I definitely think getting this game on sale with better graphics and performance would be the way to go. If a new Switch comes out in the future, it would be amazing to see this game run at a smooth 60 frames per second, like 2K obviously intended. Let me know if you're getting this game on Nintendo Switch or if you already have it on another console. If you want to see what other games might be best on Nintendo Switch, click this playlist right here. If you liked the video, consider liking and subscribing. I hope to see you in the next one. See you later.